He walked in, saw everything, and never spoke again. Even now, when I close my eyes, I can still feel the way the air shifted in that moment. It was like the entire room held its breath for him. For us. For the truth that neither of us was prepared to face. Sometimes I wonder if the silence that followed was louder than any scream he could have thrown at me. Maybe that's why it still lives inside my chest, like a bruise that never healed completely. Before I continue, if you're here, listening to me spill the pieces of a past I tried so hard to bury, then stay with me till the end. Like, subscribe, and let me tell you a story you won't forget. A story that shaped me more than love ever did. I remember the day everything started to fall apart, although back then, I didn't know it was the beginning of the end. It was late winter, not the magical kind you see in movies, but the kind that makes your bones feel hollow, like you've been carved out from the inside. I used to think that loneliness felt like absence, like something missing. But that winter taught me something else. Sometimes loneliness feels like too much. Too much noise, too much cold, too much pretending. I was married to him for 5 years at that point. 5 years of shared mornings, burnt toast, forgotten anniversaries, and half-hearted apologies. His name? Elias. Even saying it now makes something tighten behind my ribs, like my body still remembers the weight of loving him. He wasn't cruel. Not the way people imagine cruelty. He didn't yell, or break things, or storm out. His cruelty was quieter. Almost elegant. A kind that hid in small gestures, in delayed messages, in the way he'd look through me as if my existence had become an inconvenience. And I, stupidly, desperately, kept trying to be enough. To be the woman he would choose again. But life has a strange way of teaching you that trying to resurrect something already dead is just another form of self-destruction. Back then, I used to wake up earlier than him. I'd linger in bed for a moment, watching the dim light from the curtains touch his face. I'd imagine he was thinking something poetic behind those closed eyes. Something about us. But when he opened them, there was always a distance. A kind of quiet resignation. I ignored it. I told myself, he's tired, work is stressful, he's just not expressive. You know? The lies we tell ourselves because the truth demands more courage than we think we have, but the truth was already there, whispering softly. I just wasn't ready to hear it. One evening, he came home later than usual. He didn't smell like his office, that bland mix of paper, printer ink, and coffee. He smelled like perfume. Something floral. Something not mine. My heart didn't break then. No. Hearts rarely break in big, dramatic ways. Instead, they fracture quietly, like thin glass under slow pressure. When he kissed my cheek, it felt rehearsed. Mechanical. And for the first time, I asked myself, who is he performing for? I didn't confront him. I should have. But confrontation requires clarity. And I was drowning in confusion. Instead, I just cooked dinner, set the table, and listened to him talk about his day as if everything was normal. As if I wasn't unraveling inside. I watched him push his food around the plate while checking his phone under the table. He smiled at the screen in a way he hadn't smiled at me in months. It hurt more than I expected. That night, I lay beside him, staring at the ceiling, wondering how long it had been since he last touched me without hesitation. How long since he'd looked at me like I mattered. I waited for him to fall asleep before whispering into the dark, what changed? Was it me? The silence didn't answer. The next few weeks blurred into one long, echoing ache. He became quieter, disappearing into his phone, his work, his excuses. I became louder inside my own head, imagining scenarios, replaying memories, trying to find the exact moment he slipped away from me. Maybe it was when I stopped dressing up. Maybe when life became routine. Maybe when I started hoping he'd notice me again, because nothing is more unattractive than desperation, right? One morning, while cleaning, I found a lipstick stain on one of his white shirts. Red. The kind of red women wear when they want to be seen. I sat on the floor holding it, feeling my chest collapse in slow motion. I couldn't cry. Tears require permission. And I was still bargaining with reality. When he came home that evening, I had the shirt folded on the bed. He froze. Then blinked. Then said the most cowardly sentence I've ever heard, "It's not what you think." I laughed. Not out of humor, out of disbelief. Because sometimes laughter is all a broken person has left. Then what is it, Elias? I asked softly, too tired for theatrics, but cowardice loves silence. He didn't answer. He just walked past me, into the shower, letting the hot water drown the truth he didn't have the courage to speak. That night, I understood something no one teaches you. Betrayal doesn't always come with confessions. Sometimes it comes with avoidance. With "good night" spoken too quickly. With the back turned toward you in bed. I could have left then. I should have left then. But love, or what we mistake for love, makes fools of the strongest hearts. I wasn't ready to be strong yet. There was a moment in those days that still haunts me. I was sitting by the window, watching the rain trace patterns down the glass. Elias sat across the room, scrolling through his phone. I whispered, do you still love me? He didn't look up. Instead, he said, don't start. Don't start. 2 words that sliced through months of silent suffering. 2 words that told me everything I needed to know, that he wasn't fighting for me anymore. He wasn't even trying. Still, I kept going. Pretending. Surviving, but every illusion has an expiration date, and mine arrived on a Thursday evening I will never forget. He was supposed to be at work late again. I remember cooking pasta, humming absent-mindedly, hoping he'd at least pretend to appreciate the effort. But around 7 p.m., I heard the front door unlock. He wasn't supposed to be home yet. And something about the timing, the abruptness, felt wrong. When he stepped inside, his expression wasn't just tired, it was crumpled. Like someone had taken emotions he never showed and forced them all onto his face at once. I followed his gaze and realized he wasn't looking at me. He wasn't looking at the dinner. His eyes were fixed on something else. Something behind me. I turned. And that's when I saw the envelope on the table, the one I had placed there earlier without thinking too much about it, the one containing the results of a medical test I had taken because of a complication I'd quietly suffered alone, the one that said, in clear bold letters, congratulations, you are 6 weeks pregnant. I hadn't planned on telling him that way. I hadn't planned on telling him yet at all. I was still processing it myself. Still trying to figure out if bringing a child into a dying marriage was madness or fate, but standing there, with the paper between us and truth finally exposed, something happened that I didn't expect. Elias didn't speak, not a word, not even a sound. He just stared, not at me, not at the test, but into something far away. A place even I couldn't reach. His lips parted once, as if he wanted to say something. But then he stopped. His jaw tightened. His throat moved. And his eyes, God, his eyes, they didn't hold anger or joy or fear, they held guilt, sudden, raw guilt, the kind that burns too much to touch. He walked past me, slowly, like a man moving through water. He sat down on the couch with his head in his hands. I stood there in the doorway, waiting for him to whisper anything. A question. A denial. A thought. A trembling, how? Or, is it mine? Or, we'll figure this out. But he said nothing, nothing. At all. His silence was a confession. A louder confession than if he'd screamed the other woman's name. I remember sinking into the chair opposite him, my hands trembling as I whispered, say something, please. But he didn't, not that day, not that night, not the next morning. He moved around the house like a ghost, avoiding my touch, avoiding my eyes, avoiding every reality he had created. That was the moment, I think, when I finally saw the truth with blinding clarity. He wasn't quiet because he was shocked. He was quiet because he was guilty, because he knew what he had been doing, because the pregnancy forced him to see what he had been risking, what he had destroyed. His silence was the truth I had been avoiding for months. He walked in, saw everything, the test, my hope, the consequences, and he never spoke again, not about the baby, not about the betrayal, not about us, and that silence would change everything. But that's where I'll pause, for now, because what happened after, the unraveling, the heartbreak, the transformation, deserves its own breath, and I promise you, it only gets deeper from here.
He didn't speak the next morning, or the morning after that, or any of the days that followed. People imagine silence as peaceful, like a soft blanket that settles gently over everything. But silence can be violent. It can slice. It can suffocate. It can turn a home into a graveyard long before anyone dies. Asterisk. The day after he found the pregnancy test, Elias sat at the kitchen table staring at his untouched coffee. He didn't even pretend to drink it. He just wrapped his fingers around the mug like he needed its warmth. Even though our warmth sat right across from him, shivering. I watched his chest rise and fall, slow and heavy, like each breath was a burden he didn't want to carry. Finally, I whispered, we need to talk. He didn't look up. There's a strange kind of heartbreak that happens when the person you love refuses to even meet your eyes. It's like watching a door slowly close in your face, one you're still standing in front of with your heart in your hands. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't beg. I didn't cry. I just sat there, silently pleading with someone who had already left me long before he walked into that room. He pushed the mug away, stood up, grabbed his coat, and walked out. No explanation, no confrontation, nothing. That was the moment I learned something important. Some betrayals don't explode. They decay. They rot slowly beneath the surface while you pretend the ground under your feet is still solid. I spent the first few days moving around the apartment like I was made of fragile glass. Every sound felt too loud. Every silence felt heavier. Every memory of us felt like it was replaying to mock me. I wanted him to say something, anything. Even a lie. At least lies have words and words have direction. But silence. Silence leaves you stranded. It forces you to fill in the blanks yourself and the mind. The mind is a cruel storyteller. One night, I stood in the bathroom staring at myself in the mirror. My eyes were swollen from crying I didn't even remember doing. My hair was uncombed. My skin was pale. I looked less like a woman expecting a child and more like a ghost haunting her own life. I placed a hand on my stomach and whispered, "You deserve a mother who's stronger than this." And that night, something inside me shifted, not dramatically, not instantly, but enough to make me breathe differently, enough to make me think, maybe, just maybe, I needed to stop begging for answers from someone who didn't want to give them. The next morning, I went to my first prenatal appointment alone. I didn't tell Elias. I didn't ask him to come. And he didn't ask where I was going. When the doctor placed the Doppler on my abdomen and I heard the faint, fluttering heartbeat, a sound so fragile yet so full of purpose, my own heart cracked open in ways I didn't expect. It was real. This tiny life, growing inside me, was real. And in that moment, as I lay there with cold gel on my skin and the soft hum of machinery surrounding me, I realized something. I was no longer alone. I walked home that day with a kind of quiet strength in my steps. Not the loud, cinematic strength of movies, but a softer strength. The kind that whispers, "You will survive this even when everything hurts." But when I unlocked the apartment door, the smell hit me first. Perfume. That same floral scent that had once clung to his shirt. It wasn't subtle anymore. It filled the living room like an unapologetic truth. My chest tightened. My hands trembled. I almost dropped my purse. I wasn't irrational. I wasn't dramatic. I knew what that scent meant. He hadn't just been seeing her, he'd brought her into our home, into the space that still held the quiet heartbeat of the child he hadn't even acnowledged. I walked into the living room and found a delicate gold earring lying on the floor near the sofa, a small, elegant piece, not mine. Not even close to mine. I picked it up between my fingers and held it close for a moment, letting the object absorb the weight of my shaking breath. There it was, the truth, tangible, physical, undeniable. I remember sitting down on the couch, staring at that earring resting in my palm. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't shatter. I simply exhaled. Because what do you do when your worst suspicion becomes a solid object you can hold? You stop imagining. You stop hoping. You stop lying to yourself, and you start seeing, truly seeing. When Elias came home later that evening, I was sitting at the dining table with the earring placed neatly in the center. He froze when he saw it. His jaw clenched. His eyes flickered with recognition, panic, shame, all the things he refused to put into words. He didn't sit. He didn't ask. He didn't explain. He just said, "I'm tired. I don't want to fight." Fight? There was no fight. Not when only one person is bleeding. I whispered, "I'm pregnant." Elias, it was the first time I had spoken the words out loud to him. He didn't move. He didn't blink. He didn't soften. Instead, he whispered, "I can't do this right now." That was it. 6 words that cut deeper than any confession. He can't do this. This meaning the pregnancy? This meaning me? This meaning the life we'd built? Or the double life he was living? I swallowed, my voice trembling but steady enough to hold its own weight. "You don't have to do anything, just show me you care." He stepped back. Just slightly. But enough for me to notice, enough for me to feel it. It was the smallest retreat, but sometimes the smallest movements revealed the biggest truths. He went upstairs without another word, leaving me alone at the table with the evidence of his betrayal and the quiet heartbeat of a future he wanted no part of. That night, I made a decision, not a bold one, not a powerful one, but a necessary one. I decided to stop waiting for him to apologize, waiting for him to explain, waiting for him to show remorse, waiting for him to be a man capable of loving me the way I deserved. Because waiting for someone who has already left you is the cruelest way to abandon yourself. Over the next few days, I began to detach, not dramatically, not vindictively, just naturally, emotionally, like a fading echo. Like a curtain closing on a play you stopped enjoying long ago. I stopped cooking dinner, stopped asking him where he was going, stopped pretending everything was fine, and my newfound silence confused him. It unsettled him. One night, he finally spoke, not about the earring, not about the perfume, not about the baby, but about me. "Why are you so distant?" he asked. The irony almost made me smile. I responded softly, "I'm just tired." He stared at me for a long moment, as if he suddenly saw something he hadn't seen in a long time. As if he realized the ground under him was shifting. "Are you okay?" he asked. I almost laughed. Because this sliver of concern came months too late. I whispered. Then looked away. Not angrily. Not dramatically, just detached, and something in his expression changed. I saw it clearly. Fear. Not fear of losing me. Not fear of what he'd done. But fear of losing the version of me who waited. Who forgave. Who begged for crumbs of affection? Who worshipped him even when he treated me like an afterthought? That version of me was disappearing. And he knew it. One evening, while I was folding laundry in the bedroom, Elias walked in holding a cup of tea he'd made for me. He hadn't done that in months, maybe years. He placed it on the dresser beside me and said, "You should rest. You're pregnant." It was the first time he acknowledged the baby. The softness in his voice wasn't love. It was guilt. A guilt heavy enough to drag him back into small gestures, but not heavy enough to pull the truth out of him. I nodded, said thank you, and continued folding laundry without looking at him. He stayed for a moment, hovering, waiting for something, maybe a reaction, maybe a sign that the old me was still there, somewhere under the new silence. But I didn't give him what he wanted, because something inside me had shifted so deeply that his presence no longer filled the room the way it used to. His voice no longer anchored me. His silence no longer scared me. I was becoming someone else. Someone quieter, stronger, more aware of her own worth. He left the room a few seconds later, and for the first time, I didn't feel abandoned when he walked away. I felt liberated. Still, a part of me waited for him to come clean, to break the silence, to confess, to fight for us. Not because I needed him, but because he owed our unborn child at least the truth. But he never did. And fate, in its strange and unsettling way, forced the truth into the open in a moment neither of us could have predicted. It happened on a Sunday afternoon. I was in the living room, curled up on the sofa, reading a book with one hand resting instinctively on my growing belly. The baby wasn't showing much yet, but I could feel little changes, tiny whispers of life, gentle reminders that something beautiful was forming inside me. Despite everything crumbling around me, Elias walked into the room holding his phone, his face tense, his breath shaky. I didn't look up. Not immediately. I'd trained myself not to expect anything from him, but then I heard it, a notification, followed by another dot and then another. His phone lit up repeatedly, buzzing against his palm. He froze, dead still, like someone had unplugged him from reality. Something in my gut clenched. I looked up slowly. He was staring at the screen like the world had just shattered. My voice barely rose above a whisper. "Is everything okay?" He didn't answer. He sank onto the opposite sofa, both elbows on his knees, phone dangling loosely from his fingers. I watched him, his chest rising too quickly, his hands trembling, his jaw clenched so tightly a vein near his temple pulsed. Finally, I asked again, "Elias, what happened?" He looked at me, really looked at me, and for the first time in months, I saw raw fear in his eyes. Not guilt, not shame, fear. He turned the phone toward me. A message was displayed on the screen, a number I didn't recognize, a name I didn't recognize, but the message was enough. "I'm pregnant." My breath caught. My heart stopped, and the room spun so violently I had to grip the arm of the sofa just to stay grounded. The truth didn't just reveal itself that day. It ripped the remaining seams of our marriage apart with brutal clarity, and that was only the beginning. Because what came after was the unraveling, the breaking, the awakening. The quiet revenge that life orchestrated on my behalf. But I'll tell you that part soon. For now, breathe with me. For a long time, I couldn't move. That message, those two small words, kept echoing inside my skull with the force of a wrecking ball. I'm pregnant, not me. Her. The woman whose perfume lingered in my home. The woman whose earring I found buried in the fibers of my living room rug. The woman whose existence he denied with every silent breath. My chest felt too tight, my throat too dry, my eyes too wide. I had spent months thinking the worst thing he could do was abandon me emotionally. I was wrong. The worst thing he could do was build a life with someone else while I carried our child alone. The silence in the room grew thick, suffocating, but Elias didn't speak. He just sat there, trembling, staring at the message like he hoped the letters would rearrange themselves into something less catastrophic. Finally, I whispered, "How long have you known?" He shook his head. I swear I didn't know." He stopped, choking on the words. "I didn't think this would happen." He called her pregnancy, this a problem, a complication, an accident he wished he could undo, but he never called my pregnancy anything at all. Something inside me broke at that. Not loudly, not violently, just quietly, like a thread snapping in the dark. I stood up slowly, one hand on the sofa to steady myself because the room felt like it was tilting. "Elias," I said softly, "I need you to tell me everything." He did in single quotes. Of course he didn't. Men like him don't offer truths, they offer fragments. Apologies shaped as excuses, regrets shaped as tears. "I made a mistake," he finally whispered. A mistake that smelled like someone else's perfume. A mistake that left jewelry on my floor. A mistake that now had a heartbeat. I looked at him, really looked at him, and realized something strange. I wasn't angry anymore. Not the way I expected. The anger had burned me hollow long ago. What was left now was something colder, calmer, heavier: acceptance. He kept talking, something about being confused, something about not wanting to hurt me, something about ending things with her soon, but the words drifted through me like smoke. I wasn't listening anymore because I was finally seeing him clearly. This was the man I had loved. This was the man I had chosen. This was the man I had built my life around, and this was the man who shattered me with a silence so loud it drowned out every promise he had ever made. I left the room without another word. Not because I didn't care, but because caring had become too expensive. In the days that followed, something strange happened between us. He tried. Not enough to fix anything, not enough to save anything, but enough to show his guilt was finally eating him alive. He came home early. He cooked dinner. He cleaned. He hovered around me like a man desperate to hold onto something slipping through his fingers. He even bought a small pair of pale yellow baby socks and left them on my bedside table without explanation. His first attempt to acknowledge our child, but it was too late. Guilt-driven gestures aren't love. They're bandages placed on wounds the person created. One evening, he stood at the bedroom door watching me fold tiny newborn clothes I had bought for myself earlier that week. His voice cracked when he said, "I'm sorry." I nodded but didn't respond. Because sorry means nothing when the damage is permanent. He walked out of the room, and for the first time, I didn't feel the urge to follow. Around my 6th month of pregnancy, I decided I needed space. Not for drama, not for punishment, for survival. I booked a small apartment across town. Nothing fancy, nothing grand. Just a quiet place with warm lighting, a tiny balcony, and enough peace to breathe without someone's silence suffocating me. When I told Elias I was moving out, he broke. He dropped into a chair, head in his hands, sobbing silently. I had never seen him cry like that, not even at funerals. Not even when he lost people he loved, but I didn't comfort him. I couldn't. His pain was the receipt for choices he made long before the tears arrived. He asked, "Is this goodbye?" I said, "It doesn't have to be. But it is for now," and that was the truth, because the woman I had become didn't beg. She didn't chase. She didn't wait. I left the next morning. And in that tiny apartment, bare walls, soft morning light, windows that needed cleaning, I rebuilt myself piece by fragile piece. At first, the loneliness was sharp, but soon it became quiet, then gentle, then comforting. Every night, I talked to my baby, told them stories, told them secrets, told them that even if their father was lost, I would always be here, always present, always steady. Life slowly returned to me in small, almost invisible ways. I cooked meals just for myself. I read books until sunrise. I took evening walks where the air smelled like wet pavement and freedom. I heard my own voice again, soft, unsure, but mine. And somewhere along that journey, I found a job, something flexible, something creative, something that made me feel capable again. People started noticing my work. Clients reached out. My name was shared quietly, like a secret spreading through the city. Success found me in the gentle way sunlight finds a room through a cracked door. I didn't chase revenge. I didn't burn bridges. I didn't expose him. My revenge was quieter than that, softer, more poetic. I simply became someone he could no longer reach. Elias tried to come back into my life after the baby was born, a boy with my eyes and his nose. When he held our son for the first time, tears streamed down his face, soaking the baby blanket. He whispered, "I should have been here. I should have been better. I ruined everything." I didn't contradict him because some truths don't need softening. He visited a few times, always gentle, always cautious, always carrying that same look of regret that seemed carved into his features now. He asked if we could try again. I didn't respond, not with anger, not with bitterness. Just with silence, because by then, my silence wasn't a wound. It was a boundary. Months passed, lit at him reaching, me standing still, not moving toward him, not moving away either. Just existing in my own space, my own peace, my own life. And slowly, he stopped trying to fix things and instead began trying to simply be present for our child. That was enough. I didn't need more from him. One late afternoon, when the apartment was glowing gold from the setting sun and my son was asleep in his crib, Elias came to drop off some baby supplies. He stood at the doorway, eyes drifting around my little home. He saw the paintings I had done, the certificates framed on the wall, the books stacked on the side table, the small plants thriving in the corner, the calm, the independence, the life, and he swallowed hard, so hard I actually heard it. That was the moment he realized something he had refused to accept for months. He had lost me. Not because of the other woman, not because of the baby, not because I stopped loving him. He lost me because I finally started loving myself. He stepped back, blinking away tears he didn't want me to see. "You're happier now," he whispered. I nodded. Peace looks good on you, he added softly, and because I'm not cruel, I smiled a small, quiet smile that carried no bitterness, no anger, no desire for revenge, just closure. He left that day with the slow, heavy steps of someone walking away from the greatest mistake of their life. He still visits our son. He still carries his regret like a shadow. He still looks at me like he wishes time could rewind, but I don't live in that past anymore. I live here. In the present. In my own rebirth. In the quiet strength that grew out of heartbreak. In the soft happiness that belongs fully to me. I forgave him not for him but for me. So I could breathe. So I could move forward. So I could teach my son what love should look like. He walked in once. Saw everything. And never spoke again, but I did. I spoke to life. To healing. To the woman I had buried beneath years of shrinking myself. And she finally answered. This is where my story ends, not in tragedy. Not in revenge. But in peace, a peace I built with my own hands, a peace no one can take from me again.